This channel has recently featured The Weekly Dose, an ongoing series that reviewed the last week's worth of COVID-19 vaccination news. But the country has reached a turning point in this pandemic, and it's time to move from looking back at the last week to looking forward. So we are starting a new series, Countdown to Normal, which will look at where we are in beating this pandemic and what normal will look like when we get there. In this first episode, we'll be looking at the recent increase in COVID cases and asking whether we are facing a fourth wave or a bump in the road to recovery. The COVID-19 pandemic has been marked by a wave of cases. The first hit in March 2020. That's pretty much what first locked us into our homes. A second wave hit from June to July. The third and by far deadliest wave first hit in October, with the traditional flu season concluding and, to a much lesser degree, the early rollout of vaccines. That wave finally ended in late January. The country had been enjoying a rapid decline in cases until about March, when cases started to increase again, leading some to ask whether we were facing a fourth wave of COVID cases. But if we are, this fourth wave is far more regional than those in the past. This is a map of reported cases from late March, when overall cases were still declining. And this is a month later. Note that case increases are generally clustered in four areas. The first is Florida, which has seen a mild increase in cases. Next is the North Atlantic, with New York and New Jersey seeing a spike in cases that has since dropped, and Pennsylvania continuing to see an increase in cases. Cases have also increased in Colorado, but the most significant increase in cases is in the Midwest, with Michigan seeing a substantial increase in cases, followed by Minnesota and then Illinois. It is tempting to try and fault the people living in these areas for the spike in cases. They didn't wear masks enough, or they didn't get vaccinated. It perhaps gives us a sense of control, but most of these states have strict mask mandates and have been working hard to vaccinate their populations. Now, this is admittedly conjecture, but perhaps there are other factors at work here, factors out of our control. For example, outbreaks in Florida and the Northeast are clustered around international entry points, the Port of Miami and the Port of New York. And what about the Midwest? High concentrations of cases are occurring near border crossings with Canada in Detroit and northern Minnesota. Now, I'm not just picking on our friends to the north. Canadian COVID-19 cases have seen an increase that mirrors that in the Midwest. The U.S. is already sending excess AstraZeneca vaccines to Mexico and Canada. This trend may point to the need to double those efforts. And what about Illinois? Interestingly, the cases there are clustered along two major east-to-west highways coming from Detroit, I-88 and I-80. And the only portion of Indiana seeing increases in cases? I-94 from Detroit. And taking this just a little bit further, what is the next major city as one travels west on I-80? Denver, Colorado. There could be other explanations to these outbreaks, but if this theory is correct, we could see outbreaks along an east-to-west corridor across the mid-continental area and a north-to-south corridor from Minnesota. So what's really behind all this? The UK variant. The CDC's most recent numbers tracking the variant have shown a sharp increase, with reported cases more often occurring in areas now seeing a spike in cases. The CDC's prevalence data now estimates the UK variant to be the most common form of COVID-19 in the US. Now, none of this should come as a surprise. The CDC had been anticipating this trend months ago, warning that the UK variant could stall the drop in cases. Europe had already started to see a wave of cases a month ago, foreshadowing what was to come here. And what makes the UK variant so problematic? Like the much talked about South African and Brazilian variants, the UK variant has a mutation that makes it more contagious. Some also believe it is more deadly than regular COVID-19, though that is less clear. But unlike these other variants, the UK variant is not thought to be significantly less responsive to available vaccines. Indeed, real-world data from Israel suggests effectiveness against the variant remains above 90%. And where is the country on vaccinations? And where is it going? 4 months into the vaccine rollout, a quarter of the country is now fully vaccinated, meaning that population likely has over 90% immunity to COVID-19. This is the number we've discussed a lot on this channel because it defines when we achieve herd immunity to end this pandemic. But in terms of escaping a fourth wave of COVID cases, those receiving at least one dose of vaccine also matter, as studies indicate they could have as high as 80% immunity. Notably, vaccination percentages grow as age increases, reflecting the prioritization the country has given to vaccinating older Americans. While this makes sense from the perspective of trying to prevent the worst cases of COVID-19, cases in general are most common among younger people, who are now the most vulnerable to contract the UK variant. The key will be to vaccinate as fast as possible. Daily vaccination rates have steadily increased since vaccines were first approved. The country is currently averaging about 3.1 million doses of vaccine administered per day. At this rate, we could expect about 60% of the country to be fully or partially vaccinated by the end of May, and over 70% by July. With states now nearly all moving to make vaccines widely available to anyone over 16, we could see average vaccination rates increase to even higher levels over the next month, to even 4 or 5 million vaccines administered per day. On the other hand, the faster we vaccinate, the sooner we will get through those readily willing to be vaccinated. The country next faces convincing hesitant Americans to get vaccinated. Depending on how many Americans that is, we could see vaccination rates start to plateau in July or even June. But we do have a window to push this wave back, and if we can even hit just 50% fully vaccinated in the next months, experts believe we could see cases plummet, even with the UK variant. But should we believe that vaccines are actually working? Yes. When compared to case surges during previous waves, current cases are increasing at a far slower rate. As well, new hospitalizations have lagged behind new cases far more so than in the past. And most importantly, so have deaths. So while this wave is infecting more younger Americans, it's generally sparing those at higher risk for severe COVID-19 who have been prioritized for vaccination, those 65 and above and individuals with pre-existing conditions. The war on COVID-19 is hitting a new phase. Some called the day vaccines were introduced Vaccine D-Day, when America once again went from the defensive to the offensive. And the fight has continued over the past 4 months. From that perspective, this latest wave might be thought of as, and no pun intended, the Battle of the Bulge. COVID's last major counteroffensive, successfully thwarted by vaccinations on the country's road to recovery. Or maybe this is too optimistic. Perhaps hesitancy will slow vaccinations even more than expected, or an outbreak of the South African or Brazilian variants can't be controlled by vaccines. But one thing we can take heart in, for the first time in this pandemic, we face a wave of cases that we can beat. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content on getting through this pandemic. If you have any thoughts or questions, please leave them in the comments. And as always, stay safe.